Hi, welcome, and thanks for joining us for today's webinar. This webinar is part of a series called Unpacking Coaching that is being presented by the National Center for Pyramid Model Innovations. I'm Mary Louise Hemmeter, and I'm going to be your host today. Today, our topic is going to be using constructive and supportive feedback to build practitioners' confidence and competence. We've been hearing from people that this is a topic they want to hear about, so we're excited. I want to start by introducing you to our presenters. Today, we have Jessica Hardy and Sarah Basler, who have both been pyramid model coaches in a variety of different settings. So I'm going to just pause for a minute and let them introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Jessica Hardy. I am an assistant professor at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. I've been involved in coaching as a coach, as someone who's supported coaches, as a researcher, and I'm excited to be here today to talk with you about how to provide feedback effectively.
Hi, I'm Sarah Basler, and I'm here at Vanderbilt University. I'm an educational consultant across many projects in the Hemmeter Lab, and a lot of our work focuses on practice-based coaching and pyramid model. I have worked as a coach and coaching coaches, so supporting them in their implementation with teachers, as well as I've been an early childhood teacher and worked as an administrator in a university childhood program. So I'm excited to be here today and talk to you guys a little bit more about providing effective feedback and reflection.
All right, so I'm just going to do a real quick overview of what we're going to do, and then I'm going to turn it over to Sarah. So they're going to talk a little bit about both preparing for reflection and feedback, and then actually using feedback and constructive feedback with early childhood practitioners. And then if we have any time left over at the end, we'll answer some of your questions. But Sarah and Jessica also know that I might embed some questions as we go through. So Sarah, take it off.
All right. So as most of you are sure, I'm sure you guys are familiar with practice-based coaching. Collaborative partnerships are the context in which all of the other components of PBC happen. And having a strong collaborative partnership is really an essential prerequisite to delivering effective feedback. And that's because feedback is often received more openly when it comes from someone that you know and that you trust. People naturally feel more open to feedback and suggestions and trying new things and ideas when they feel supported by their coach. If we find that a coach or a teacher might struggle with receiving or delivering reflection and feedback, it could be caused by a strained collaborative partnership. So it's really important not to skip building and maintaining that partnership. So you really want to focus on getting to know the teacher or practitioner and letting them get to know you, finding out information about their schedule, about their teaching style, about how they like to learn, maybe what their coaching history was like, because that could help give you some information about how they view coaching. And in order for coaching to be effective, it needs to feel like a safe and non-judgmental place for practitioners to try out new things and ask questions and just really feel supported by you. So how do we develop a collaborative partnership? We can do that by developing and creating a coaching agreement. And a coaching agreement is just a document that the coach can share with the practitioner, and it really lays out the expectations for each coaching partner. So what the practitioner can expect from the coach, as well as what the coach can expect from the practitioner. It's important that everybody involved in the coaching partnership has a clear understanding about what coaching is and what coaching isn't, what data is going to be shared, and who's going to see that. So the use of a coaching agreement can really help make all those coaching activities really clear and transparent, so there's no surprises. There's never really any question about what's going to happen. Another way that we can aid in the development of a partnership is to allow for practitioner choice. So allowing for choice doesn't necessarily mean that the practitioner has unlimited choice, but it could be helping the teacher feel more invested by allowing for some choices in this process. It also helps to help the practitioner feel as if coaching is being done with them and not to them by allowing that choice. So for example, choice could look like a program could offer, ask practitioners who wants to participate in coaching, but sometimes that's not an option for every program. Maybe the program selects who's going to be coached. In those instances, practitioner choice could be about selecting the goal or practice that the practitioner works on. It could be about when the teacher will implement the practice or how the teacher plans to implement. And then another way to build that partnership is through communication. It's really key to have clear communication to maintain a strong partnership. Coaches can communicate with practitioners in clear and ongoing and really in predictable ways so that the practitioner sees patterns and knows what to expect. It can come in a variety of modalities. That could be via text or emails, phone calls, even handwritten notes. And it's important that coaches select a method that's convenient for the teacher, because it could be that maybe the teacher doesn't prefer to receive emails because they don't really check it that often. So maybe a phone call would fit their needs better. Or maybe texting doesn't feel right because they use their phone for more personal activities. So they'd prefer you reach out via email. So finding out information about what the teacher prefers and how they like to be communicated with is also something to consider. And another thing to consider about communication is making sure that if you are having to plan release time for a teacher, so if the practitioner needs to be have someone trade in with them so that you can meet with them to discuss the focused observation, that you always let the teacher know as well. So it could be that the coach is scheduling that with the supervisor or director, but the coach also needs to make sure that they're directly reaching out to practitioner as well, because there's enough surprises in the day of a life of an early childhood educator, and you don't want a pop-up visit from your coach to be a surprise that happens. So those are some ways.
So
And
Sarah, can I just jump in here? Because I think one thing that what Sarah was just saying about we don't want pop-up visits is that's one thing that makes coaching really different than what a lot of teachers are used to, where people do just pop in their room to give them feedback and suggestions. And what Sarah was just talking about is the importance of creating a place where the practitioner feels safe, and by knowing what to expect and knowing when you're coming, that creates that. So sorry to interrupt.
no, great point. Thank you. So part of reflection and feedback is really that preparation. And it's really key to having encouraging really effective reflection and feedback. So what does that look like? It begins with setting aside that time to plan. So I know that I personally like to give myself at least 30 minutes to prep, but sometimes even more. But that helps the coach to reflect on what was observed and really review the notes and plan what it is that coach wants to share with the practitioner. During this time, this preparation time, coaches can plan out reflection questions that they want to ask to practitioners. And not only coaches want to plan for questions, but also for backup questions, because sometimes we might ask an open-ended question and get a closed-ended response. So having extra questions prepared in case it doesn't go the way that you plan. And then there also needs to be time to prepare for the feedback that you're going to deliver. What is the message that you want the practitioner to leave with from your meeting? So as mentioned, allowing yourself enough time to plan the questions that you want to ask and the feedback you want to deliver is really key to prompt that reflection. And different types of questions can elicit a different kind of response from the teacher. So it can be helpful for the coach to really think about what is the information that you want, that you need from the practitioner, and what you're hoping to get from the practitioner. So really being intentional about the questions that you are planning. The questions that you see here come from the Teachstone blog, and it's called a coaching guide to asking reflective questions. And this resource has some really great reflection starter questions and examples. And you see here, there are some questions that can elicit teacher perspective, some questions that will encourage the practitioner to evaluate what's happening, as well as connect or integrate concepts. Um, and then we have more questions that can encourage planning, and then facilitate prediction, prompting through the process. It's important to remember that we want to be intentional about the questions that we ask, and that we aren't just asking a question because it's part of the cycle. We prompt reflection because it can be a really powerful tool for teachers to really think about their implementation. And we're not just asking questions for the sake of asking questions. And reflection starter phrases tend to be my favorite go-to tool in my coaching toolbox, and I use them frequently, so I always have them handy to when I'm planning.
I would add, Sarah, that just like what you just said, don't be afraid to plot out what questions you're going to ask and use these starter phrases, because we really want to ask thoughtful, impactful questions. And those can be hard to do on the spur of the moment, which is why it's important to plan. But it also can just be hard to have a variety and to have questions that really get at what you want to know. So it's important to use resources like this that people have created.
Mm-hmm. It's very important. All right, so a reflection pitfall that I kind of mentioned previously is beware of using reflection questions that might be too broad and general, and really try to ask specific questions. For some people, they naturally reflect. So if you ask an open-ended kind of broad question, they might be able to reflect and probably provide a pretty in-depth reflection. But for some, asking a broad question could lead to a more close-ended response. And that's why we say, to prepare not only the questions that you want to ask, but also some backup questions in case that happens. So an example here of a broad kind of general question would be, how do you think it went today? That type of question isn't very specific and could cause a practitioner to answer with something like, it went well. And in the event that that happens, you could even ask, well, what was one thing that you felt went well with your implementation, or to get more information about that. And the example over here is a more specific example. So that would be, tell me about how implementing group friendship activities impacted the children today. So that really hones in on a specific aspect of the teacher's implementation, and can be easier for the practitioner to think about and respond in a more impactful way. So we've discussed reflection. I'm going to turn it over to Jessica, and she's going to talk about feedback and how to prepare for that.
Thank you, Sarah. So feedback can be a really challenging thing to provide effectively, or to feel comfortable with providing. And so it's really important, just as Sarah mentioned earlier with reflection, it's really important to plan your feedback. So you don't want, this isn't something that you want to do off the cuff without thinking about it beforehand. You also want to make sure that your feedback is focused, and to understand that there are two types of feedback, supportive and constructive feedback, and they're both really critical to helping teachers maintain high quality practices and learn new practices. So we'll start with supportive feedback. So a lot of times what you see, what coaches tend to do when providing supportive feedback is to provide a lot of supportive feedback, to provide almost a laundry list of things the teacher's doing well. And the drawback to that approach is that it can overwhelm teachers or practitioners, and you want to really help them hone in on the things that they need to keep doing. And to do that, you have to be really purposeful. You want to be succinct, so you don't want to just overwhelm them with all the good things that you saw, and you want to help them make connections. So you want to help them understand how what they're doing well is positively impacting the classroom and the children in the classroom. So that goes to making connections, helping them understand that their practices have an impact, and things that they do maybe just casually might have a very big impact that you want to highlight for them. You also want to connect your supportive feedback to the action plan goals that the teacher is working on. So providing supportive feedback isn't meant to be something that's just everything good the teacher is doing, because every teacher does a lot of good things all the time. But we really want to focus that on what the action plan goal is. And we really want this to be a time where teachers are not just tuning you out, but they are listening and thinking and thinking about how they're going to maintain these practices. So sometimes what we see with supportive feedback is this pitfall, which we call attributive feedback. So attributive feedback is a comment like, "You're so patient," which makes the behavior that you're trying to highlight seem like more of a trait that is inherent in the teacher, rather than something that is a deliberate behavior that is under their control. So if someone tells me that I'm patient, I might think, well, yeah, I am. Or I might think, not really. But that doesn't help me move forward with those practices that are part of being patient. So we want to be specific about providing supportive feedback that helps teachers know what behaviors to focus on. So an alternative to "You're so patient" is, "You waited 10 seconds for Kate to put the piece in the puzzle before you offered assistance." So that makes it clear that it's not something that's inherent to you. It's a behavior that you chose to do, and it had a positive impact on Kate. We also sometimes see feedback that is real general or not data-based, like, "That transition was so quick," and that is not bad in and of itself, but we want to provide more specific information. So what does "that transition was so quick" really mean? So an alternative would be to say something like, the time that lapsed between the first child being dismissed to centers to the last child dismissed was only 3 minutes. So being data-based and specific about what made that transition successful is really important. We also want another example that that we sometimes see is you are really supportive to your co-teacher. So again, that's a little bit more attributive and it's not very specific. So an alternative to that would be you went over to your co-teacher, put your hand on her shoulder and thanked her for assisting a group of children to become engaged in centers. So that provides more specific information about what was done well and lets the teacher or practitioner know that it was observed, that it had a positive impact, and that's something that they should keep doing.
Hey, Jessica, can I say two things? One thing real quick. One is that remember this feedback is going to be, we're dropping in and talking about the component of PBC that is reflection and feedback, but it's going to be based on an action plan you've developed with the teacher. So the feedback is going to be something the teacher is awaiting because y'all talked about it and you've made a plan for that feedback. And then the other thing is that what Jessica's talking about in terms of the descriptive feedback is the part that just really makes it seem less judgmental to a teacher. So you're not judging them as a person, what Jessica was saying about being patient or whatever, but you're giving them really explicit feedback about something they did that they asked for feedback on.
Great, thank you, Emil. Okay, so now let's move to talking about constructive feedback, which I think most of us would probably agree this can be one of the most challenging things to provide to someone, whether you're their coach or whether you just know them in your personal life. So when we're providing constructive feedback, it's important that we provide opportunities for reflection first. So providing opportunities for reflection allow you to see what the teacher is thinking about the situation that was observed or the observation that you had. For example, are they being really self-critical, maybe too self-critical? Are they noticing the same things that you noticed in your observation? Do they think everything went great? Starting with reflection really gives you a way to know where the teacher is at related to that observation, so that you can use that information to better plan your constructive feedback and be more prepared for your conversation that's going to result. We also want to make sure that when we provide constructive feedback, that teachers or practitioners understand that the intent is constructive. So sometimes I've heard or seen coaches give, or have done it myself, give constructive feedback that is softened to such an extent, not softened, but has been worded in such a way that teachers might not even realize that you're being constructive. They might even think it's supportive feedback. And so we want to make sure that that teachers understand that we're providing them with feedback to help them make a change. So understanding that is the intent of the feedback is important, and understanding that, like Emil mentioned before, it's not judgmental. It's data-based, it's specific, it is meant to help move the needle on their action plan practices. So we want to when we provide constructive feedback, help teachers understand what differently they could be doing or what additionally they could be doing related to their practices. And we'll talk more about that in just a minute. We also, sometimes when we provide constructive feedback, we can go back to that laundry list of things. So we might provide a laundry list of suggestions, things they could do. You could try this, you could try that, you could try this other thing. And that can be overwhelming, and we want to make sure, and it can come off as, well, you can do any of these things. And we want to make sure that when we provide constructive feedback, we're being focused. We provide suggestions. We're giving different ideas, but we're making sure that those suggestions turn into action. So that might mean that you say something, you provide a couple suggestions and then ask the teacher what he or she thinks about what would be the best suggestion to act on, or if they have another suggestion that they want to, another idea that they want to try out. And you really want to make sure that, so it's important to embed choice in that, and also to make connections between the suggestions that you are making and what you think the potential impact on the classroom and the children will be. So you're not just making suggestions because you think they're a good idea, you're making suggestions because you think it's going to have a positive impact on the teacher's practices, the classroom functioning, and child behavior and development. We also want to make sure that we don't overwhelm with constructive feedback, just like with supportive feedback. If one hears a list of things that they could be doing differently, you might start to shut down because it just feels overwhelming. And even if the intent is constructive and supportive and you have a good partnership. So we want to make sure that we always provide more supportive than constructive feedback, and that when we're providing constructive feedback, we're really meeting teachers where they're at. So maybe in an ideal world, you're thinking this teacher has 595 things that you wish she would do differently. That's probably not going to be the case. But when you're starting in a coaching relationship, you really want to think about what's related to the action plan goal, what's meaningful to the teacher, how can you meet the teacher where they're at, and not try to work on 595 things at once. To really build on strengths, because we all have strengths, and focus on what is going to be most impactful and meaningful for the teacher at that time. So sometimes we get the question about when should I as the coach start providing constructive feedback to a practitioner? And as you all hopefully know, practice-based coaching is not one size fits all. There are a lot of different ways you can go about moving through the practice-based coaching cycles. So it depends. A lot depends on the relationship you have with the practitioner and the partnership that you've developed. But we know that typically takes some time. So our recommendation is to observe and meet a couple of times before you offer constructive feedback, and to really focus on providing supportive feedback to build practitioner confidence and trust. So to only provide supportive feedback for the first 2 to 3 cycles with a practitioner until you have a better developed partnership, and constructive feedback will be better received because you'll have that relationship to base it on. So we created this visual about this visual about constructing your constructive feedback. So when you are planning to provide constructive feedback, there are 3 phases that you want to think about. The first is planning your constructive feedback, as hopefully we've hit home kind of hard. Planning is really important. The second phase is delivering your constructive feedback, and the third phase is evaluating. So each phase is really important, and we want to make sure we don't just jump to delivering and skip the planning and evaluating phases. So the steps look like this. First, you determine the focus of the feedback. You want to think about what the action plan goals are and how to build on practitioners' existing practices, as I was just talking about. So your constructive feedback should be purposeful. You have to plan what you will say. So you want to make sure your feedback is specific, it's data-based, it's focused on the action plan goal. I would recommend, especially if constructive feedback is something that's a little bit more difficult for you, to write something down so you have it planned out what you're going to say. That doesn't mean that you read it to the teacher, but just that you've thought through what you want to say so it's clear in your head. Then you move to delivering the feedback. So as I mentioned earlier, you're going to ask a reflective question, and really allow time for a conversation to emerge if that's what is organic to the situation. So if you have if you ask a reflective question and that opens up a really rich discussion, then go with it. That is really powerful, and can elicit more input from the teacher and more ideas about what the teacher is thinking. You also should be prepared, as Sarah mentioned earlier, with follow-up questions. If you ask a question that kind of ends in a dead end and you want to probe a little deeper or ask in a different way, you should be prepared to do that. You want to acknowledge the teacher's perspective. So perhaps the teacher noticed the same thing you did about a situation. Perhaps the teacher thought it went awesome. No matter what, you want to acknowledge that the teacher has their own thoughts and feelings about what was observed and that that is valid. You want to state what you observed and its impact on the classroom and children. So it might be something like, let's say you're working on transitions with a teacher. You might say something like, I didn't hear any transition warnings being provided, and I noticed that each transition lasted at least 10 minutes, and children didn't really seem to know what was going on. So stating what was observed, stating what its impact was on the classroom and children is important. And then to recommend what to do differently or additionally. So you could suggest that the teacher provide transition warnings, or suggest that the teacher use zone scheduling to make sure that there's an adult available to receive them at the new place they're transitioning to, or make sure that the children have something to do when they're waiting. But to provide time, provide those suggestions about what to do differently or additionally without overwhelming the teacher, provide time for discussion and problem solving, embed choice as is appropriate. And then the last step of the constructing your constructive feedback visual is to evaluate how it went. So did it go really well? Are there things you would do differently? To really be reflective yourself as the coach about what you might change about your own behavior, and to also consider how you will follow up on the constructive feedback. So remember, we want constructive feedback to lead to action. So what will that action be, and how will you check back in on that action? So we're going to talk about this in relation to a specific scenario, which is on the screen, but I'll also read to you. Sammy is a coach to Melissa, who is a pre-K teacher. Sammy has noticed over the past 2 observations in Melissa's class that she responds differently to boys than she does to girls when they engage in similar behaviors. Today, during a whole group movement activity, Sammy observes the children dancing and jumping and hears Melissa say, "Thomas, calm your body. Do you need to leave the carpet?" Right after this interaction, she hears Melissa say to 3 girls, "You are so excited. Keep on dancing, girls." So, Sarah, do you want to talk through how you might address this situation if you were the coach of this teacher, if you were Sammy?
Yeah. So first of all, this situation could be really tricky because as we read, it seems like there's some equity issue going on here. That it seems as if the teacher might be responding to boys differently than she might be to girls. So you really want to be sure that you prepare and tread lightly, because the type of feedback that you deliver could really damage the partnerships. You want to be careful about that. So first, in the planning phase, you want to make sure that that your feedback is connected to the action plan. So, and sometimes there might be things that come up that are too sensitive to not bring up. So sometimes, so if they're red flags, or if it's something that might be harmful for children, you certainly want to address those issues. But when you can, you want to make it as closely connected to the action plan as possible. So here, say the teacher might be working on expectations with children, you could make a clear connection there. So the first thing that I would do would be figure out my mode of entry here, and how I want to deliver this. And then I would plan out some questions that I'd want to say. So I might plan out questions about centered around how the teacher could let children know what's expected during the movement activity. So how does she prepare children for the movement activity? What is it that she does so that children know what to do? And then I would probably write out, sometimes I write out everything I'm going to say, but just to practice. And then I also utilize colleagues quite a bit. It's nice to have someone who is a support to me or is coaching. I don't have to share personal information, but I can just say, hey, this is what happened. And I'm feeling a little unsure about how this conversation might go. Can we practice? So I might role play with another coach, and get some support, kind of get some advice, um, because it is really tricky and you have to make sure that it'll be received well. And it also will help with your confidence in delivering it if you have a chance to practice. Now, I know that we don't always have the luxury of that much time to really prepare, but you can get some ideas. So then I would, after I've prepared like the message I wanted to send, and maybe even some resources that I want to share, maybe pulling out some things that I could give to the teacher to help with implementation. Then I'd go straight, then I would meet with the teacher and start out with that reflection question. So something that I might say here would be, tell me about what you do to let children know what's expected of them during this movement activity. And then I would wait, which is actually kind of something I have trouble with, that wait time, because sometimes it feels like, oh, are they going to respond? And you want to talk over them. But that wait time is really important because we want it to be reciprocal. So wait, see how the teacher responds. And just as Jessica was saying, it's important, even if they have a response that is way out of left field and it feels not how you wanted it to go, you want to acknowledge, but also then that's where that follow-up piece of how you can guide them in a different way. So it's about maybe reframing what it is that they say. So for instance, in this situation, if the teacher says, well, they know what to do, and Thomas is just always really busy, and I'm afraid he's going to hurt the other kids. So I have to tell the boys to do it a different way. Then, acknowledge that, yeah, it can be tough. The movement activity can be exciting, and there's always the issue of people getting hurt. But then you might follow up with what you saw. So today, when I was observing, I noticed that you responded to Thomas in a different way than you responded to the three girls, and they were doing the same behaviors. I might even ask another question, like to see if the teacher viewed the interaction that way. Um, or I might just go ahead and provide the feedback that I have, and then maybe suggest the teacher to think about what are some supports that she thinks the children might need in order to know what it is that they can do at the carpet and what they should do. And then I could offer some suggestions like, would you want to try maybe a visual that shows them the expectations for movement activities? So thumbs up movements. You could even provide some visual supports on the floor for specific children. Um, maybe that you sing a song prior to the activity to remind children about the way that they move their body. And then I would ask the teacher her thoughts. So I'd ask her how she felt about those suggestions. And then the big piece is having the teacher select something to do. So if you offer multiple suggestions, it's really important that they come away from the meeting knowing what it is that they need to do differently. So if I offer 3 suggestions and then we move on and we don't select one, it could be difficult for the teacher to know what it is that they should try next. So I might say, we talked about the use of a visual, and we talked about the use of a song. Which would you like to try? And then you can update the action plan steps so that it's clearly there and teacher knows what to do. And then we could problem solve or discuss how that's going to look. If I've provided a resource or brought a resource with me, like I have this visual that I used in my classroom. Do you want to use this? Then the teacher can use it or not, or maybe just asking what they need in order to be able to implement. So that's typically the process that I go through to plan and deliver. And it doesn't
Thank you.
always go that smoothly.
Well, thank you for sharing your great ideas about what is admittedly kind of a tough situation. And then you would end the cycle of constructing your constructive feedback with evaluating. So as Sarah mentioned, it might not go smoothly, it might go great, but really thinking through what you did and how it went and what you can learn from it. And taking each opportunity that you provide constructive feedback as a learning opportunity for yourself to improve your own practice is important. And it's also important to, as Sarah kind of illustrated through how she would handle the situation, to really be data-based. And so when you're observing, to take notes on what you see specifically, because if you just have kind of an inkling, well, I think this teacher treats boys differently than she treats girls, that's not really very specific or helpful. But if you have some specific data or notes to go off of, that's going to make your conversation much more powerful and will hopefully lead to change. So speaking of using constructive feedback as a learning opportunity, we want to challenge anyone who acts as a coach to think about their comfort zone and the importance of stepping outside the comfort zone. And this is really a similar process for teachers as it is for coaches. As a coach, you want to be willing to have hard conversations. You want to make sure you don't shy away from providing constructive feedback or engaging in reflection. You want to take some risks, because when we take risks, that's when we learn and grow as individuals and as coaches. And as I mentioned, it's a parallel process for teachers, because we want to help teachers step outside their comfort zone. So maybe you have a teacher who's been teaching for 15 years. She feels like she has a really good handle on her classroom, and she does. It runs smoothly. She has good relationships with kids. But we know that there's always things you can be doing differently. There's always things you can improve upon as a human being or as a teacher. So being willing to provide constructive feedback, to engage in a coaching partnership that pushes you and that teacher into the risk zone, that will help you both learn, and avoiding going into that danger zone which is very high stress and we want to avoid going. So we have a handout that details more about these different zones and the importance of stepping outside your comfort zone that's provided. Okay. Sometimes we hear, and maybe have even said ourselves, this comment: I provide feedback, but the practitioner doesn't change their practice. So what to think about here is whether there is more support that you can provide to the practitioner to assist their implementation. So you might provide feedback, but maybe you need to provide additional feedback or additional support, or use additional coaching strategies that will help the practitioner learn a new practice or learn a new way of doing something.
All right, so we have a ton of questions. Thank you, that was great, you guys. And you actually touched on some of the things that people have asked questions about. So I'm gonna just pose a couple of questions where I'm merging different people's questions. So I'm thinking about what you were just talking about, Jessica, and there were clearly questions about how do you deal with teachers who aren't responsive to feedback. And it's interesting because one person asked, how do you deal with a teacher who seems really invested in coaching, who seems really receptive, but whose practice doesn't change as a result of feedback? And the other question that was kind of related, but kind of the opposite in a way, is how do you deal with teachers who are resistant? And so it sounds like in one case, the teacher seems on board but doesn't change. And on the other, the teacher seems resistant. So I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about how you structure feedback, reflection, and feedback to kind of get at the issue of teachers being resistant.
So I think this is kind of the age-old question, working with teachers who are resistant, either actively or passively resistant to coaching. And I think there are, just as with most questions, there are no easy answers. There are just different things that you can try. I would say it's really important to do a couple of things to help with to help move the needle on teachers' practices. And we've touched on some of them already. First, being data-based. So showing that you're not there, you're not commenting anecdotally about things you think should be done differently or things you think could went well, but that you're really pointing to data and the impact on the children in the classroom, because all teachers want their classrooms to run smoothly and their children to learn and develop and be happy. And so making those connections clear and providing specific data that back up what you're sharing with them is really important. I also think it's really important to follow up. So all too often, I think that feedback leads to nothing. So we want to make sure that feedback leads to something on the action plan, a specific behavior, whether it's yours as the coach, some support you're going to provide, or the teachers, that you can check back in on, have conversations about in your next coaching meeting, so that there's a little bit of an expectation of action that you can follow up on. I also think we have to be willing as coaches to expand the coaching strategies we use. I know when I was coaching teachers, there were strategies that I felt comfortable with, and there were strategies that I did not feel comfortable with. But sometimes it's those hard strategies, like maybe role play, for example. Role play is not something that comes super naturally to me, but it can be very impactful with helping try out new behaviors and get feedback on how it went and problem solve around it. So being willing to use a variety of coaching strategies and really using this as an opportunity to further build your coaching partnership. So thinking about talking with the teacher about what different coaching strategies they're interested in, what coaching strategies they feel comfortable with, what you're willing to try. So it all kind of goes back to that collaborative partnership, and just as with just as with a child who might not be learning the first time we teach them, we want to make sure we're always willing to try new things and try a new way and be persistent and not give up on anyone, because coaching is a very challenging thing. I think back to how I would have done if I was coached, and I probably would have been a resistant teacher. And that's not something I'm bragging about. That's a personal fault, but it's important to know that that comes from a real place of it's a very natural and normal reaction. Sarah, did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, I think you touched on the piece about collaborative partnership, but I think that sometimes when we have resistant teachers, it could be the fact that we skipped over building that
Mm,
partnership and we went straight to, all right, we've got to get this done and you've got to start implementing these practices. And it could also be that they were pushed into coaching and they don't
mhm.
really understand what it is. So, really orienting them to the process and getting to know them and building that partnership early on.
Great point.
Yeah, Sarah, I think that point, because there were also some questions, and I realize we're just about out of time, but there were some questions that I think what you just said there at the end about the partnership is really important. That I think, number one, we're coaching in a way people aren't used to. You know, people are used to people just kind of telling them what to do and whatever. And this is a really different way of coaching. And I think sometimes people aren't prepared for that, and we jump in and they don't really know the way that we're going to be coaching. But the other thing I think is that we often think we have a relationship established when we really don't. And people are, a lot of teachers are used to not trusting people and not trusting that people are going to be there consistently and not trusting that people are going to be supportive and not evaluative because their experiences before in the past have led them to believe that. And so we might think we've established a good partnership when in fact we really haven't. And so I think kind of revisiting collaborative partnership strategies all through is going to be important. The other thing I
Uh,
wanted to just go back to the feedback thing a minute, which is Jessica, as you were talking about how to deliver feedback in different ways, I was thinking about what Sarah said about after she gives some suggestions, she'll say, what is it? What do you want to try? What do you think will work? So we're not just leaving with, here's some ideas we think you should do, but what do you think about those? Might be a way to get people more likely to try them. What were you going to say, Jessica? Sorry.
I was going to add to or highlight something Sarah said as well, which was about being kind of, I can't remember exactly how you put it, but being transparent about what the coaching relationship or the coaching cycle and partnership is all about. And I think even being clear and transparent to teachers about one of my jobs is to help you grow. And so, maybe even sharing that comfort zone, risk zone visual with them to help them understand that this process is supportive, but it also can be challenging in a really fun and important way. And that's something to be expected.
All right, I'm sitting here reading through all the questions and we're actually out of time. And so we will certainly think about how we can post some answers to some of these questions on the website afterwards. I think that as I kind of look through these questions really quickly, I think many of the questions are about teachers that are resistant or teachers that don't seem to be changing or those kind of things. And I want to just kind of, in hindsight, I want to, or whatever, I want to remind everybody that we just talked about one component. We just really focused on reflection and feedback, and we didn't focus on, intentionally on the action planning piece and the needs assessment piece and the focused observation piece. And in terms of the action planning piece, we focused on that in a previous webinar. And there's a really good recorded webinar, which might really be useful in terms of some of these questions y'all have about resistant teachers. Some of that, what we talked about related to action planning might be helpful in that respect. And that webinar is on our website. So anyway, all right, I hate to cut us off because Sarah and Jessica, I know you have a million good pieces of advice, but we are out of time. So I just want to remind everybody that that you can visit our website, that all the resources from today's webinar, people have been asking questions about whether we can give them some examples of some of the things we've been talking about today. So we'll post some of those things on our website. You can also visit the website to find the webinar that I was talking about previously, as well as other webinars we've done and other resources that might be helpful for you to use in your coaching work. Again, we really want your feedback. So when you get your evaluation via email, we hope you'll fill it out. We hope you'll tell us about topics you would like us to cover on future webinars. Just as a reminder that you can get a certificate after you fill out that evaluation. And if anyone's listening to this webinar after it's recorded, you can use the link that is on the screen right now to go to the survey and certificate. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. There are a lot of people on this webinar, and we appreciate your time, and we hope that you'll be back with us on our next webinar. So thank you.